Welcome to another episode of Simplicity, talks based on Baha'i perspectives. Today's subject is, what is the station of Bahá'u'lláh? And to answer that, there have been many writers who have said different things on the same subject. I have reduced it into 3 points. These are my personal views. They are not authorized by any institution. The 3 points are: Bahá'u'lláh was a transformer. Second, Bahá'u'llah's teachings had a principle called force multiplication, and the third was that Bahá'u'lláh was a person who was an architect of structure. Let me deal with the first concept of Bahá'u'lláh as transformer. It is difficult for a chair to describe the person who made it. If you ask a carpenter what he thought about the chair, he can tell you its length, its breadth, its height, and so forth. But if you ask a chair to speak about the carpenter, the chair cannot do that. So to some extent, we are limited by our own understanding and our lack of understanding. So with that caution in mind, we now enter into a discussion about the word transformer. Bahá'u'lláh explained that religion, for example, is born and then fades away as time passes, in the same way as our seasons. You have spring, summer, you have fall or autumn, and then you have winter, when everything is frozen, dies, and it's regenerated again in spring. Religions are like that. But what human beings do is they hold on to one particular idea which they will not want to change, without understanding that it is the spirit of the religion that's important and not the outer form of the religion. Take, for example, a tree, oak tree. So there is seed, it is planted on the ground, it becomes an oak tree, it lives, it gives rise to fruits. The fruits fall to the ground, some of them are converted, eaten by animals, and one of the seeds is born into the soil and becomes a tree again. Is this tree the same as the earlier tree? Yes. Is it different? Yes. What's the same about it? Same genetic structure, isn't that so? Similarly, when a person is born, becomes young, infant, adolescent, adult, becomes very old and passes away. We cannot pay attention to the structure of the person, but the spirit that lived in that person. So if I were to remember my forefathers, my grandfather, for example, I don't remember his structure, but the spirit, his laughter, his jokes, the things he says. So to elevate it to a religious level, we must understand the spirit of every religion instead of being bound hand, foot, and mouth by the ritualism which then limits us. So Bahá'u'lláh brought this transformative thought into being. Take another concept. Take the concept of equality between men and women. Bahá'u'lláh brought this transformative thought, which was already there, but he transformed everybody's thinking about this concept. I'll give you an example. He says, imagine the two wings of the bird as the man and the woman, which then raises the question, what does the body represent? What do you think? Does it represent the family? Of course. Does the head represent the direction of the family? Of course. Does it represent, in a larger concept, the community? Of course. Does it represent the nation? Of course. Does it represent the world? Of course. Does it represent all creatures? Of course. Because there are male creatures and female creatures and complementary structures. And so he says, when a bird wants to turn, the wings have to dip in coordination. One dips, the other rises. It doesn't mean this wing is better than that wing. When the bird has to bank the other way, this one goes down and that one comes out. And so he introduced this dynamic concept of interrelationship between men and women to show that there was equality, but it doesn't mean that because the man is equal to the woman, they must do the same thing. Women are biologically different, men are biologically different, but they are equal. So equality there must be, equity there must be, but it doesn't have to be uniformity. These are transformational thoughts. Let me give you another example. Our life is a spiritual life. So Bahá'u'lláh came up with this thought, this idea, which idea had been around for 10,000 years, 15,000 years. But he'd explain it. How does he explain it? He says, imagine this tree which is 50 feet tall, 100 feet tall, a sequoia. The length and the strength of the tree and its fruits and its leaves is supported by an identical structure below the ground. But nobody sees the roots. The roots suffer day and night. They penetrate the earth in the darkness. They bring in minerals and water and nutrients and trace elements, and they pump them up through the xylem vessels and the phloem vessels. Xylem vessels bring in water. Phloem vessels bring in nutrients into the tree through the trunk, and the trunk expands every year, becomes thicker, the branches are put forth, leaves come out, and there are fruits. We, the human beings, see the tree in its great beauty. We see the leaves, we see how they are stretched out, enjoying the rays of the sun, and the fruits are born, and animals and creatures and human beings eat of the fruit. But nobody recognizes the roots. But for the roots, there would be no growth. There would be no life. There would be no nutrients. And so Baha'u'lláh says our role in this world is, one, spiritual. Two, our role is invisible. We have to work hard, overcome obstacles, don't worry about recognition, so that in the next life, there are spiritual rewards and we can become close to the Lord, and so on. So that is important. These are transformational, and I think you would agree with me, such thoughts are transformative thoughts. So we've dealt with the transformative part. I would like to deal with the concept of force multiplier. Thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years ago, when a man wished to hunt an animal, he would throw a stone at it, hoping to injure it so that he could catch it and consume it. Then he came up with the thought of attaching a sharpened piece of stone to a stick which he hurled. He had greater accuracy, greater range, and he could control the force with which he used it. He could also use it for other purposes. It had a utilitarian principle. Then he realized that animals which were 30 meters away couldn't be accessed unless he had a bow and arrow. So the energy of the string that pulled the bow was transferred into the arrow, which flew through the air, created greater accuracy, created greater range, and he could strike with greater precision. And over the thousands of years, we've had many force multipliers. Baha'u'lláh was a force multiplier. Why was he a force multiplier? Think about it. By looking at the concept of the equality of men and women, when a man leads the house, he has to think of all the burdens himself. He has to solve all the problems himself. He is the leader. He is the one who's responsible. But if he has a lady next to him, to whom he gives equality and dignity, now there are two people thinking about the same problem. What is the English expression? Two heads are better than one. Imagine a community, a nation, a society where women are given dignity and equality and equity and understanding. That country will become better. We have seen this in the West. We've seen this in many different parts of the world where women lead and they reach great heights of sophistication and civilization. This Baha'u'lláh spoke about when? More than 150 years ago. So we need to understand that that's a force multiplier, equality. Then think about the second concept, medical facilities. There is this pandemic, and we see from our experience that those who are poor have a lesser ability to access medical facilities than those who are not so poor. But wouldn't it be wonderful if everybody in the world, poor or rich, could access the same medical facility? We are lucky in Malaysia, but in other countries, to get medical assistance, you have to pay for it. If you don't have money or medical insurance, you cannot access medical facilities. Imagine a time like this if someone is assailed by an illness like COVID-19. So Baha'u'lláh spoke about it a century and a half ago and spoke about equality of treatment, the need to deal with modern medicine, not falling into the kind of medicine that's not scientifically supported and so forth. The third one is education. Baha'u'lláh spoke about the equality of education. He said, if you are of a Chinese ethnic origin, you spoke the Chinese language, you have a duty to learn an international language. You could go anywhere in the world and it is as if it's your own home because you could speak and understand a language which everybody could understand. Baha'u'lláh asked for a language that was universal. He spoke about universal education for everybody. This was 150 years ago when it was not even heard of in some of the most advanced countries in the world. So these are force multipliers. Now I move on to the architect of structure. Baha'u'lláh had a view that leadership must be born out of spirituality. If a man is spiritual, then he will be morally upright. It is impossible to find a man who is spiritual but not morally upright. And therefore leadership in the Baha'i faith under the teachings of Baha'u'lláh was based on spirituality. Therefore, leaders were chosen not by paying money to the voters, not by a parading of wealth, not by holding on to power, not by might, but by their spiritual duties, by their spiritual conduct, by their spiritual attitudes to the obedience of God. And if these men were men of virtue, then they were selected by a secret ballot. You couldn't go on a publicity stunt in the Baha'i faith and say, please vote me because I come out on TV or I write this or that. The Baha'is will not vote you. They will ask themselves, is this man spiritual? Number one. Is he a capable leader? Number two. Has his past conduct showed that he is the kind of person who can do this job? Yes. So those men are chosen because of their output, and women who can show that they can lead the community are chosen, and it is done by a secret ballot. Nobody knows who voted who, and those 9 people then will go and vote a national. spiritual assembly, members of which will then go up and vote in the Universal House of Justice. And as you can see, there is a spiritual process involved. You cannot become a leader by power. You cannot hold on to power. And guess what? Every 19 days, every Baha'i has a right to turn up at the 19-day feast and ask his leaders, I'm having this problem. Can we solve it, please? What are we doing about it? And the leaders have to answer, not once in 4 years. Every 19 days, there is a formal structure by which you can challenge your leaders, but it is done under spiritual principles, under spiritual courtesy. There is a way of doing it, and Baha'u'lláh created a structure for it, and that structure he called consultation. You take an idea, this is your idea. We are all discussing a problem, and one person says, this is the way to solve a problem, here is my idea. Baha'u'lláh says, this idea doesn't belong to you, it has got no proprietary value. Another person says, this idea is not good, let's add on to it or cut a bit of this idea away. You shouldn't get angry. So Baha'u'lláh creates a structure of leadership and discussion by dealing with detachment. When you give an idea, you are detached from that idea. You don't get attached to that idea. Look at this guy is attacking my idea, I'm going to get very angry and I'm going to walk out. Nobody does that in consultation. So consultation was a structure created for the analysis of ideas and solutions. And there are specific structures in consultation. I now want to speak about the third element of the structural architecture. Baha'u'lláh spoke about the monetary systems of the world and economy based on compassion and equality and fairness. The next thing that he emphasized on was that we, the human race, are not the only occupants of this earth, that there are fowls of the air and the beasts of the field and leviathans in the ocean that plunge in the deep. There are microscopic creatures. There are planktons. We are responsible for all of them, and when we do anything in this world, we have to pay attention to these creatures. So there you have it, my dear friends. We started with the question, what is the station of Baha'u'lláh? It is difficult to explain. We, being creatures created by God, cannot explain who our manifestations are, but we discussed three principles. The first one, that Baha'u'lláh was a transformer. Second, Baha'u'llah's teachings were a force multiplier. And third, that Baha'u'lláh was a person who was an architect of structure. We dealt with these three principles by examples. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for joining us. I hope to see you again. Thank you.